We'll start off at quarterback with Dak Prescott. I had him listed as a stardom last week, and he had a big game, over 22 fantasy points against the Giants, and I'm going to keep him in my lineup this week against the Bears. I mean, they looked terrible last week against Jared Goff, allowing 5 touchdown passes. This is a great matchup. Start Dak Prescott, and let's just stay in that game and start Caleb Williams, too. He scored a combined 41 fantasy points in his first 2 games. And if you saw Dallas's defense last week, well, you know, Russell Wilson threw for 450 yards and 3 touchdowns against them. The total in this game is near 50. I'm starting Caleb Williams in what should be a very high-scoring game. Speaking of Russell Wilson, I'm going to bench him this week against the Chiefs. I get it. He had that big game last week against Dallas, but don't chase the points. Kansas City's 0-2. They need a win to avoid going 0-3, and their defense held Jalen Hurts to 101 passing yards and just 11.5 fantasy points last week. I'm also benching Trevor Lawrence, and I get it. He had a good game last week, over 19 fantasy points against Cincinnati, but I don't love the matchup this week against Houston. In 8 career starts against them, Lawrence has failed to score at least 15 fantasy points 6 times. He's also scored fewer than 11 points in 3 of his last 6 starts against the Texans in games where he's played at least 58 snaps. I am fading him outside of Superflex leagues. Let's move on to the running back position, and Jordan Mason, he should be a must-start this week against Cincinnati. Remember, Aaron Jones, he is out this week, so Mason will serve as the #1 running back for the Vikings, and the matchup's very good against Cincinnati. They've already allowed 3 running backs to beat them for 15-plus points in their first 2 games of the season, so start Jordan Mason and start Javonte Williams. I've been dead wrong about him over the first couple of weeks, but look at the numbers. He is getting 79% of the running back rush share, 12% of the target share. He's the lead back in Dallas, and he's got a good matchup against the Bears. Again, I think this is going to be a high-scoring game. They've allowed 3 running backs to score over 13 points against them so far this year, including 2 who've gone over 15. So, yeah, start Javonte Williams. In terms of the running backs I'm sitting, we're going to start off with Jacory Croskey-Merritt. And I understand he is likely to see more touches this week because Austin Eckler is out for the season. But remember what I told you last week about Omarion Hampton playing the Raiders? Well, Hampton did not have a good game. And the Raiders defense, sneaky tough against running backs. They have not allowed more than 1 running back to score more than 14.5 fantasy points against them in a game since week 12 of last year. So I think Bill is a risky flex option. And also Tyrone Tracy is someone that I'm concerned about this week against the Kansas City Chiefs. If we learned anything from last week, we know he's in a committee. And actually, Cam Scadabo played more snaps, had more touches, and scored more fantasy points last week against Dallas. And Kansas City's defense has allowed just 3.8 yards per rush to running back since last year, and only 5 have beaten them for more than 15 points in their last 18 regular season games. So Tyrone Tracy is a fade. Among the wide receivers that I love this week, how about Rome Odunze? And I'll throw DJ Moore into this mix as well, but Odunze has been a fantasy star. He has already scored 47.5 combined fantasy points. He's seen 20 targets, which is the most on the Bears. He's got the Cowboys this week. Their defense has given up the 3rd most fantasy points to perimeter receivers over the first 2 games. This will be a high-scoring affair. Start Rome Odunze and start DJ Moore. And I also like DK Metcalf this week, and I get it. He's had a slow start to the season, scoring just 23 combined fantasy points, but I like the matchup against New England. In the first 2 games of the season, they've allowed 4 wide receivers to beat them for at least 13 points, and 3 of them have gone over 16 points. So keep DK Metcalf in your starting lineups. A couple of wide receivers that I'm concerned about this week. We'll start off with T. Higgins. We know Joe Burrow is going to be out for the majority of the season. He's out this week. And T. Higgins has had a slow start, scoring only 20.9 fantasy points in his first 2 games. So Higgins already sees his ceiling decline because Jake Browning's the quarterback. And also, this is not a great matchup against the Vikings. They've held DJ Moore and Drake London to a combined 14.5 fantasy points in their first 2 games of the season. So beware T. Higgins. And how about Travis Hunter? I mean, is it possible that we're overrating him? I mean, in his first 2 games, he ranks 3rd in snaps played among Jaguars wide receivers, and he's only scored 14.5 combined fantasy points. Next up, he's got the Texans. They've held Mike Evans, Devontae Adams, and Emeka Egbuka to all under 13 points in the first 2 weeks of the season. So clearly, Travis Hunter now comes with some major risk for fantasy managers. Let's kick off the tight ends with Jake Ferguson, who I had as a stardom last week. He had a huge game, 9 catches, almost 17 fantasy points against the Giants. And he's now seen 18 combined targets in the first 2 weeks. That ranks second among tight ends so far because he is very trusted by Dak Prescott. I love this game. I think there's going to be a lot of points. The total's very high, so start Jake Ferguson in this one. And how about Juwan Johnson? He has been phenomenal this season. In fact, no tight end has more targets after 2 weeks than Juwan Johnson. He's clearly gained a rapport with Spencer Rattler, and he's got a good matchup this week against Seattle. Their defense has allowed 10 plus fantasy points to 2 tight ends in their first 2 games. Among the tight ends that I'm fading this week is Mark Andrews, and I liked him last week, and he dropped a touchdown pass, would have actually given him a good stat line. Unfortunately, he scored 2.9 combined fantasy points in the first 2 weeks. It's kind of like last year all over again, and now he's got the Lions. They've allowed an average of just 8.7 points to tight ends in their first 2 games, and they also have allowed the fewest points to tight ends dating back to last year, so Mark Andrews' struggles could continue. And what's going on with Evan Engram? I mean, he is out-targeted by Adam Troutman last week. His route participation rates are low. They are not good enough to be a starting fantasy tight end, and he's got the Chargers this week. They've allowed just 3 tight ends to beat them for more than 12.7 fantasy points since the start of last season, and they held Brock Bowers to 8.8 points last week, so I'm sitting Evan Engram.